It's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's check in on the TV series Law & Order SVU, which jumped the shark more than a decade ago. A show that's supposed to be about law and order prefers to demonise ICE agents these days. Watch this travesty as the show's heroine is arrested by ICE.
Captain Benson, you're interfering with the federal operation.
No, she's not. Jorge Ruiz is a material witness, and he's in the custody of the NYPD.
Do you really want to help a rapist go free? He's ours, okay? Take him to holding.
Once he provides his testimony, we'll release him.
This you? You have been obstructing this operation from the beginning. That is a federal charge. Put your hands behind your back.
Well, we shouldn't be too shocked. Last year, SVU had an episode where a white rape victim reflected on her white privilege because her rapist was black.
I am going to. Believe me. Because I can afford therapy. I have that luxury. And maybe one day I'll be okay. But if that teenager goes to prison, he may not be. Ever.
But Law & Order still has a long way to go to reach the dangerously woke heights of this episode of Cocomelon Lane, a Netflix program for children. Remember this? A boy in a tutu dancing for his two dads. Of course.
We know about you. You love to get up and dance. How about you break out those moves for your two biggest fans? If you're not sure what to choose, think about all the things you like to do.
Wow. Okay, now to Randy Windgarden, the hard left activist paid $500,000 to be the president of the American Federation of Teachers. She's determined to whip up maximum fear and hysteria. Here she explains why she's wearing a paperclip.
There is a reason why in Norway, when the Nazis took over Norway, that's why I'm wearing this paperclip. I wear two things now. The American flag, nobody can take patriotism away from me, and a paperclip. What did the teachers in Norway do when there was the Nazi occupation? They started wearing paperclips.
That's the sort of deranged rhetoric that could incite crazy people to commit acts of violence. And never forget that that mad banshee was allowed to direct government policy on things like masking and school closures under the Biden administration. Now, let's check in with the ladies of The View, who are all triggered by the notion that members of the armed forces should actually be fit for service.
Pete Hegseth spoke to U.S. military leaders from around the world to lay out his very retro vision for our armed forces. Watch.
This administration has done a great deal from day one to remove the social justice, politically correct, and toxic ideological garbage that had infected our department. We are done with that. It's tiring to look out at combat formations, or really any formation, and see fat troops. Likewise, it's completely unacceptable to see fat generals and admirals in the halls of the Pentagon.
Why is he obsessed with fat?
Yeah, and fitness.
Gosh, I don't know, Joy. Why is the Secretary of War obsessed about fitness? Do you really think fat, obese troops are ideal? And Joy is looking for some conspiracy behind this bizarro push for standards, as she sees it.
So why do you think they're doing this? I mean, there's always an ulterior motive for all that crazy stuff.
Well, that's the major question, and if it has anything to do with the recruiting lull, they probably just made it worse.
That was the dangerously misinformed Sarah Haynes claiming there is a recruiting issue. There was a massive recruiting issue under the Biden administration. As soon as Donald Trump was re-elected in November, recruitment numbers soared to record highs. We really should have more of Sarah Haynes on Lefties Losing It, because she's as awful as the others on The View, but she's a little bit boring, isn't she? While Sunny Hostin, for example, is awful but weirdly compelling. Here she is being befuddled. Fun.
I'm actually really befuddled by why he did that. The optics were terrible. Return
to the highest male standard for combat positions because the troops were fat.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that was supposed to be an uplifting message for our military.
You know, her complete ignorance is part of her charm, really. She doesn't get it. She thinks having standards is demoralising. I guess it would be for The View, because all the hosts would be sacked if there were any standards, which would be devastating for this segment. Where else can I get such a ready supply of weapon-grade crazy? Here is Joy Behar again. This time she's claiming America won't survive 3 more years of Trump.
Every day. It's every day is a shock and awe here. And I for one, am skeptical that we will survive this.
Joining me now is Newsweek's Senior Editor-at-Large and Article 3 Project Senior Counsel, Josh Hammer. Josh, the ladies of The View are outraged by the notion that military personnel should be fit for service. When will the left understand that meritocracy is back and all the DEI madness and political posturing that really has no place in the armed forces, that is out? That is something Pete Hegseth was very clear about.
This administration has done a great deal from day one to remove the social justice, politically correct, and toxic ideological garbage that had infected our department, to rip out the politics. No more identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses. No more climate change worship. No more division, distraction, or gender delusions. No more debris. As I've said before, and will say again, we are done with that.
Josh, that was pretty emphatic. What did you make of that speech?
That's what I voted for, Rita. That is literally exactly what I voted for. In fact, I was a very early supporter of Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. I wrote numerous articles at the Daily Mail and elsewhere supporting his confirmation. That was a tough confirmation fight, actually. It was very difficult to try to get Joni Ernst Spy on board. So I was personally all hands on deck there. And this is exactly what I anticipated. And this is exactly what I wanted, because Pete Hegseth is the kind of guy, Rita, who served his country honorably in multiple overseas theaters. He is of a younger generation. He knows all the problems. He can directly relate to the problems, the woke, addled nature of the United States military under Presidents Barack Obama and Joe Biden. He can relate to it because he lived it, because he has seen it with his own eyes in a way that a lot of these stodgy, old, fat generals that he's referring to have not necessarily been able to relate to. But really, Rita, what Hegseth is trying to do, it's really not that radical. It's actually something of a throwback to a bygone era from as recently as, I don't know, like 20, 25 years ago at the most. I mean, once upon a time, the United States military was unanimously feared across the world, all throughout the world, as the most lethal fighting force in the modern history of mankind. Maybe really in all of mankind, at least going back to the days of the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. But what made the United States military great, what led the U.S. military to storm the beaches of Normandy and to take the high ground on the cliffs of France against the Nazi invaders there, those men who did that, Rita, they were not there because they thought it was good to be fat. They were not there because they thought it was good to be a man who would put on a female wig or chop off their body part in the name of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion. They were not there because they had some sort of body positivity or because they were gay or transgender. No, they were there because they were men, typically just men, who were really, really, really good at hunting down and killing the enemy in the most effective and efficient way possible. That is the military that I strive for. That's the military that Pete Hegseth envisions. And God willing, Rita, that is the military under his leadership and President Donald J. Trump that we're going to get back here ASAP.
And the Secretary of War was clear, Josh, that women are welcome to serve in any capacity, but they have to get there on merit. Standards aren't going to be lowered, physical standards, to meet any sort of quota system.
Our female officers and NCOs are the absolute best in the world. But when it comes to any job that requires physical power to perform in combat, those physical standards must be high and gender neutral. If women can make it, excellent. If not, it is what it is. If that means no women qualify for some combat jobs, so be it. That is not the intent, but it could be the result, so be it. It will also mean that weak men won't qualify because we're not playing games. This is combat.
This is life or death.
Josh, that's going to outrage all the usual suspects because they believe that diversity is our strength, even in the military, even if that diversity is achieved through lowering standards to meet certain gender or other quotas.
I find this leftist notion so utterly unrelatable that I can barely contort my head to wrap myself around the mentality who actually thinks that the military should be there to promote diversity of sexes, diversity of sexual orientations, diversity of gender identities, diversity of literally anything. No, the U.S. military is not supposed to be diverse for the sake of diversity. If it happens to be diverse, if it happens to be, a nice mix of black people and white people and Hispanic people and Asians, whatever, they're great, fantastic there. But there's absolutely no compelling reason why we have to necessarily pick and socially craft the military to do anything other than what we were just talking about, which is to hunt down and kill the enemy in the most effective and efficient way possible. By the way, this whole notion of trying to socially engineer the military to fit these postmodern, bizarre, woke neo-Marxist standards has also had a debilitating effect on American morale. If we actually look at the morale of young soldiers, Marines, infantrymen, sailors, and so forth, who sign up for the military there, the morale is actually, at least prior to this administration, was polling in really, really low. And the U.S. military is also missing its recruitment targets, oftentimes by double-digit percentage, by a very high margin year in and year out. So this is really rapidly heading towards a near existential crisis there. America needs a strong military. We need volunteers. There is no conscription here. There's no draft there. If we are going to stand up against communist China, which is getting ever closer potentially to invading Taiwan, God forbid, the Philippines, who knows? If we're going to stand up against all of our enemies, we need a strong military. Again, Pete Hegseth gets that with every fiber of his being. He's not going to cut anyone some slack just because they happen to have a certain type of genitalia or they certain to like sleeping with a certain type of person who's their same sex, whatever. No, those days are done. They are done. I voted for this, Rita. The American people voted for this. This is the way it's going to be.
Now, President Trump also addressed military leaders, and he had this to say about using the military to take on drug cartels.
Under our leadership, the military is now the knife's edge in combating this sinister enemy. We have to put the traffickers and cartels on notice, and we've done that. Try to poison our people, we will blow you out of existence, because that's the only language they really understand.
Josh, he has been blowing up those boats, the traffickers, some incredible footage of that. And he also wants to use the military to take on the law and order crisis in America's biggest cities. What do you make of that plan? He's mentioned cities like Chicago and he's talked about Portland. Could he utilise the military to do what he achieved in DC?
Yes and no. Literal armed troops, like the actual men who sign up for the U.S. Army and U.S. Navy, cannot be used in day-to-day law enforcement practices. There's a statute from the late 1800s called the Posse Comitatus Act that explicitly prohibits that. Having said that, there are other statutes, including the Insurrection Act, which goes back even further, back to the Thomas Jefferson presidency around 1807 or so. The Insurrection Act does give the president the ability to send in the National Guard to try to restore order. Again, when certain conditions are met, you can't just snap your fingers and send it in there. But if you earnestly determine that there is a state of anarchy, that law and order is not being restored, then there are various conditions on which the National Guard can be sent in. This actually is what Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, Rita, lest we forget, that is what Tom Cotton was talking about in the infamous June 2020 op-ed at the New York Times that led to the whole staff walkout there, led to Barry White's resignation. That's literally what Tom Cotton was talking about. His op-ed was titled "Send in the Troops." He was talking about the insurrection, not the National Guard. So that's what Donald Trump is talking about. And he is indeed, I think, on very firm legal ground, again, depending on just how bad the city in question is. But let me tell you, I mean, having lived in Chicago, having lived in other blue cities as well, it's oftentimes really, really bad. Now, I think that Trump, he's been talking a lot about Memphis, Tennessee. There have been some National Guardsmen already deployed to Memphis, Tennessee. I think Memphis is actually a great example as to what this should look like in practice, because when you're trying to coordinate with the local authorities there, with the National Guard, you first and foremost coordinate with the governor of the state, much more so than the mayor. So I think the sweet spot here, Rita, should be blue cities in red states. So that makes Memphis, Tennessee, a very enticing option. Austin, Texas, I think would be another very enticing option there. But you want ideally a governor who is very sympathetic there, and I think it would be kind of easy pickings to go for a blue city deep in the bowels of a red state. If he wants to take on a challenge of really going for it in San Francisco with the Gavin Newsom, I mean, I say bring it on. I mean, that would be a fun fight for sure, but I think it would be an easier bang for your buck. He would have to expend less political capital, that is to say, by going for a blue city in a red state.
Josh, that's an excellent point, because those blue cities, the big cities, are almost all Democrat, even if they are in Republican states. Austin is a prime example. Doesn't even feel like Texas anymore. It would be fantastic to make Austin Texan again.